Just recently, I pointed out that Sony seemed to be done with the Japanese video game market, and that, in spite of many defensive excuses a lot of fans make, that they were sidelining it and moving on. I also pointed out that this is not because of any perceived decline of the Japanese market, which saw growth last year and which remains Sony's second biggest market even now, nor because of a Japanese market that doesn't like home consoles, evidenced most effectively by the fact that among the most successful games in Japan at the time were ones that could only be played on consoles and not in portable modes in any form. A quick note before we move forward. Please consider subscribing and enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon to get new video updates. And while you're at it, please click like if you enjoyed this video. It really helps us out. With that out of the way, let's begin. Almost as if to vindicate the point, Sony has now made its most decisive action yet in terms of highlighting and broadcasting to the world that, in fact, it may very well be done with the Japanese market to the meaningful degree many PlayStation fans would hope for or expect. We recently got the news that Sony is going to be shuttering Japan Studio, the prestige in-house Sony development team that ranks among its oldest and responsible for some highly iconic, beloved, and critically and commercially successful games almost entirely, including even the third-party support and localization teams, with those being rerouted to Sony's international development studios instead. And with this, I think we can lay any notions that declarations of Sony's abandonment of Japan are premature to rest once and for all. It is now evident they are not. But what exactly does Sony's decision comprise of, and what are its implications? Well, it can actually be understood in three broad strokes. Sony Japan, the development studio, is now mostly done. Sony Japan, in terms of local marketing and support for Japanese third parties, as well as Sony's own Japanese IP, is also being wound down, and those functions will instead be handled by Western studios. And finally, other Sony Japanese studios such as Polyphony Digital and Team Asobi remain unaffected by this move. So let's tackle those one by one. In terms of Sony Japan's loss as a development studio, that is truly a tragic outcome, especially given how iconic and integral to the history of PlayStation they have been. But let's be honest, in practical and functional terms, this one will probably have minimal effect. Unfortunately, Sony Japan had already been slowly gutted by PlayStation over the last decade or so. Sony Japan had been bleeding important and notable talent over the last 5 years. They lost people as notable as Kiichiro Toyama, Fumito Ueda, and Masaki Yamigawa in this period. Their game output has been dwindling in the last 10 years, especially on consoles. They managed to put out only a fraction of games that they used to on the PS2 or the PS3. The budget allocated to them has been steadily going down, and Sony Japan games got next to no marketing support by PlayStation anywhere, not even in Japan, let alone Western markets, even when those games were extremely well received, such as the cult favorite Gravity Rush series. So, functionally, all that happens is that the nearly no games they were putting out are now reduced to no games. The nearly no marketing that they got is now no marketing, since there's nothing left to market. And the nearly no important remaining personnel that they had at Sony Japan are now no remaining personnel. That is, of course, a very cold way to look at it, because, as I've said before, a lot of the heart and soul of PlayStation comes down to the diversity, depth, and variety provided to it by the Japanese games it gets in its library, that its competition Xbox definitely does not, or certainly not to the same degree. And Sony's capability to have those games on its platforms is now hamstrung, at least in terms of being able to produce it on its own. However, the wording of Sony's confirmation, which explicitly states, quote, "the roles of external production of Japan Studios titles will be concentrated within the global functions of PlayStation Studios," seems to suggest that Sony Japan may have also acted as an interface, a liaison between the PlayStation platform and Japanese third parties, and that function has also been gutted from them and been reassigned to Japanese third parties, and this would be a hefty loss indeed. Now, again, to be very clear, the writing has been on the wall here for a while too, for those who have been observant of many smaller things here. We've heard complaints from smaller Japanese developers about being forced to submit their games for certification to PlayStation's Western headquarters, adhering to their Western certification guidelines, even if they have no plans on international release. We've heard of PlayStation arbitrarily applying content restriction guidelines, such as for violent content in CyberConnect 2's Naruto games on Japanese games. We have heard of reports regarding Sony's strategy from anonymous insider sources, who have claimed that Sony allegedly plans on focusing on big hits as far as Japan goes, counting on the fact that mid and smaller tier Japanese games don't have any place else to go, which is a calculation that may have started to backfire on them, given the success of the Switch and the recent underperformance of PlayStation. We have heard Sony is not supportive of smaller Japanese developers, even something as innocuous and minor as Sony forcing the Western layout and functions of the cross and circle buttons on Japan has pointed at this, which are the reverse of what Japan has been used to, where circle is accept and cross is cancel, in keeping with Japanese cultural symbolism of the two symbols, and the long-held standard of the Japanese console market. Even accounting for this, however, I feel like this will definitely start to have a bigger visible impact on the quantity of smaller Japanese games on PlayStation going forward. If these smaller companies find PlayStation hard to work with, which they may, especially if there is no local contact for them, and they have to deal instead with someone placed in a different part of the world, in a different time zone, speaking a different language, then they may choose to forego PlayStation for their releases, a move which may become more and more admissible as sales of Japanese third-party games on PlayStation platforms continue to fall, as they have been for the past year. Even in terms of bigger Japanese support, collaborations with independent Japanese developers may be impacted. Something like Bloodborne. After all, that was a Japan studio collaboration with From Software, but Sony explicitly notes that the function has been also rerouted to its Western first parties. Even the long-rumored and never quite materializing Silent Hill game could see adverse effects, as that too would fall under the purview of something like this. Now, if all you cared for from PlayStation are their big Western third-person action and adventure games, you really should be safe. Those aren't going anywhere. Even in terms of Japanese support, if what you wanted are big blockbusters like Resident Evil or Final Fantasy, the future of those on PlayStation is secure. Those won't stop coming to the platform. But the flavor of PlayStation libraries came from smaller Japanese games and developers, both first and third parties. And going forward, we will definitely see that being impacted negatively as a result of this. It will almost play out like Xbox, which gets the big Japanese games without trouble, but smaller fare isn't always guaranteed. It's a move that makes sense financially, but conceding on an entire country as a market and as a development community might not be the wisest long-term move and may end up impacting the health of PlayStation, at least relatively. I don't think PlayStation will suddenly fall to selling only 30 or 40 million units. I just think that its insane global success owes itself to being a global platform, and very explicitly and specifically sidelining a market, and such a big one at that, is anything but global. And with that, we reached the end of the video. Have anything to say? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we upload new videos every single day on GamingBolt, so please consider subscribing, as it really helps us out. Thanks for watching.